I'm Nicole Petrandrea-Huff from After Magazine, and I'm here with Tawny Lara, author, sexpert, internet sexpert. Hi, Tawny, and author of this amazing book, Dry Humping, a guide to dating, relating, and hooking up without the booze. So
It's
first of
me.
all, it's you. We were just talking about the first time we met, which was a year ago at a Sam's Bar party. And I remember you mentioned you were working on this. You mentioned the title. And I was like, that's so freaking clever. I love it. I love it. I can't tell you how many people I've told. So I just finished reading it. There's like a lot to unpack here. So a lot. I felt like, it's not just a book, and I don't know what to say just. In addition to being a book about sex and sobriety, it's like a crash course in getting to know yourself, self-care, self-love. So we're going to start with you, and then we'll talk about the book, talk about some key points. So tell me first about yourself, and like what led to this, and what was the point where you knew you had to write this book, and what was the process? That's 3 questions.
Yeah. I mean, when I first got sober, I quit drinking November 30th of 2015. And the thought of dating, let alone having sex, just dating without alcohol, just scared the hell out of me. And I wanted to put a resource out there that younger me needed, and this was, like I said, 2015. So like 2016, there was not like the sober world was not what it is now. It was still very like traditional AA. Sober curious wasn't this household term yet. And there was not a ton of resources about sober dating and sober relationships. The ones that are out there, like there's also a fabulous book called Sex and Recovery by Jennifer Matissa that I highly recommend. It's written through a 12-step perspective. And that helped me quite a bit. But as you know, like AA 12-step was not part of my journey. So I wanted to put a resource out there that is for, sober curious, even people that still drink alcohol that just want to be more mindful of the way that alcohol intersects with their love lives, or someone who's in long-term recovery. Like I really wanted anyone who is interested in the alcohol-free sex and dating conversation. I tried to use as much inclusive language as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very inclusive.
Yeah, I interviewed dozens of people for this book. Mental health professionals, doctors, neurologists, biochemists. Like I wanted to understand the science. And then I also interviewed just people, regular, sober curious, normal drinkers. I just wanted to really understand everyone's relationship with relationships and alcohol. I'm not anti-alcohol. If you can find a healthy relationship with it, good for you. I will say I am anti the societal norms that alcohol has created. I'm anti-big alcohol. And I would just encourage people to get creative, think outside the box when it comes to dating ideas. Don't just say, let's grab a drink. Like, let's get creative here.
There's so much around this, like this need we all seem to have before getting sober, or just in society in general, to like bolster ourselves and to basically convince ourselves to do something we don't really want to do. I got sober 3 years after the end of my marriage. So I was really like dating and trying to explore this too. And it was a very interesting, kind of scary process. And people would be like, how can you even do that? How can you, or people I was dating would say like, will you even be attracted to me if you're sober? Like everybody feels that they need this to bolster themselves, or the beer goggles, or it's a very interesting message in our culture.
It is exactly. Like you said, sometimes your sobriety or sober curiosity is often seen as a mirror to the person you're dating, or even a family member, a friend, and they might feel defensive, like they have to explain the reason that they drink. And it's like, I don't care. Just, I don't, because that's what works best for me. But if you do, like, there's no judgment. But I had a similar sober dating experience where people just, either wanted to talk about sobriety all the time, or they treated me like their armchair therapist on a date to unpack their relationship with alcohol. Or even some people like tried to convince me like, oh, you can't even have just one. Like, I'm just like, wow, why why is it like this? But as you know, because you've read the book, there's conversation starters in there to help the reader feel, armed with these tools when they are going out on their first sober dates, when they are having sober sex for the first time, how to have these conversations, because we weren't taught that. We were not taught how to advocate for ourselves, especially women. We were not taught how to ask for what we want in bed, or even like advocating for yourself can look like advocating for yourself in bed, but it could also mean speaking up when it comes to deciding which restaurant to go to on a date, which you would not believe how many women are afraid to speak up on that.
Right. I think it goes back sort of, one of my next questions is like the first section of your book. It's about getting comfortable with yourself before getting into a sexual sober relationship. So, and that falls sort of into that. Can you talk about that? Like how to do that and why?
Yeah. So the book is split up into 3 different sections. The first section is about dating yourself. The middle section is about dating yourself and also just dating in general. And then the middle section's about sober sex. And then we end with sober breakups and long-term relationships. You can't have a book about sober dating without talking about breakups. So I had to include that. But as you know, the recurring theme of the book really is it's advocating for yourself. And when I say dating yourself, I'm not just talking about like bubble baths and face masks and taking a yoga class. I'm talking about really getting present with why you're relying on alcohol, whether it's one drink to curb first date jitters or drinking until you black out to do something that you really don't want to do in bed. There's a huge gray area there. And when I say dating yourself, I mean really like doing the work, figuring out who you are without that drink. And that work is best done, in peer support groups, with a therapist, with trusted friends, in a journal, stuff like that.
That really is a journey. That tends to be a lot of the themes of the articles we write about in the magazine, is like trusting your intuition, getting to know who you are, asking for what you want. You're right. We're not taught any of those things. I still have trouble with telling people where I want to eat.
I know, isn't it?
It's like, of all the things, that's
it's funny because I also used to struggle with that. And I actually, in doing all of this dating myself work, I realized it was a form of people pleasing. And someone actually pointed out to me that, if someone says, where do you want to eat dinner? They really want to know. They're asking because they genuinely want to know what you want to eat for dinner. And if you just say, oh, whatever you want, I don't really care, you're actually putting more work on them. You're making them make the decision when they ask you. They genuinely want to know what you want to do tonight.
I'm like, let me be coy about it for
yeah. And I
think maybe part of it is decision fatigue, where I'm like, please just do make the decision, but also
and that's totally fair too. There's always there are definitely times when I really don't care. Just take me somewhere and feed me.
Right.
But I think it's important to discern the difference between the two.
Right. I think your example was someone suggests sushi, but you don't eat fish. Like, do you go with it, or do you say, no, let's do that?
Yeah.
I want to talk about the phrase liquid courage. I was thinking about, when do people say this? They say this in dating situations, talking to members of or people they're attracted to. Karaoke. People always say it about karaoke. I need liquid courage to get up there.
Yeah. Our friend Laura Silverman, she does sober karaoke, and I think it's so cool. I'm not a karaoke person. Even when I drank, I was just not a big karaoke person, but we all have that thing or those things that we did or do. We feel a little bit more confident after a drink. And as you know, the whole point of like the thesis of this book is reminding readers that they have courage. They have intrinsic courage in them. They don't need to outsource their confidence to alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole book is, tangible advice on how to really get in touch with your innate courage. So you don't have to rely on the liquid courage. It's like the example I use in the book is like, in Dumbo, they give him that feather to show him he can fly, but he realized he didn't even need the feather all along. And I think liquid courage kind of works the same way. When you get sober, you realize you used alcohol, or I'm saying you, like personally, I used alcohol to do all of these things that I thought I couldn't do without it. And then I quit drinking, and then I'm like, oh, wow, I guess I didn't need that alcohol the whole time.
I relate to that. I think a lot of people relate to that.
And I think that's relatable whether you're sober or not. Like that's, in all of the interviews that I did, I interviewed a lot of people that drink alcohol, that have a healthy relationship with alcohol, and everyone related to the concept of liquid courage.
I think you have a quote somewhere that says, it's not actually courage, it's just an erosion of your ability to like make good decisions.
Yeah. That was
not real courage. Yeah.
It's a quote from Amanda White. She has a popular Instagram account called Therapy for Women, and there's a lot of quotes from her in there. She gives really good, tangible advice as well.
Mm-hmm. I have 2 teen kids, and when I talk to them about alcohol, which I do, but also I try to dial it back a little because of what I do. They're just, oh, mom has that alcohol-free magazine, But one of the things I say to them is like, if you hear a voice in your head that says, I'm not fun unless I drink, I can't do this unless I drink, that should be a red flag. And I think we all start to hear that voice, or people who have come up drinking alcohol, like heard that voice at some time. Like, oh, I'm much more fun, I'm funnier, I'm sexier, I'm this and that. Like, that's when the red flag should go off and say, like, what's actually going on?
I'm so glad that you're teaching your children that, because I feel if I was introduced to alcohol in that way, it could have been totally different. I think my relationship with alcohol could have been different. And I don't blame my parents or anything. It's just, it was a different time. We didn't talk about that kind of stuff back then. And my relationship with alcohol was, I was introduced to it at a party, and someone was like, drink this, you'll get fucked up. And I was like, all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much.
And the rest is history.
And then I was like, wow, I am more fun. Like immediately, like day one, I started to.
Yeah, it's instant, and that's one of the biggest questions that I get, or one of the most popular questions that I get in my line of work is like, how do I have fun on a date without alcohol? How do I have fun in the bedroom without alcohol? And what they're really asking is, is there a 1-to-1 replacement for tequila? And there's not, unfortunately. Like the replacement is doing a whole bunch of work on yourself. And it's not fast. It's not like there is no direct replacement for alcohol, which is why, in the book, when I'm talking about dating yourself, you have to find, alcohol takes up such a big part of people's lives that you have to figure out ways to fill that void. You can't just stop going to boozy brunch. You have to replace boozy brunch with something, with an activity. And that's hard. People have a really hard time with that.
Like, what am I going to do now?
What am I going to do now? Who am I going to do it with? All of my friends go to boozy brunch. So what am I going to do? And, in early sobriety, I filled up my schedule with taking writing classes, studying Spanish, traveling, like doing these things that I always wanted to do one day, and finally doing them because I had a surplus of time because I was no longer doing those, going to boozy brunch and partying hard every night. And I also was no longer racking up really expensive bar tabs. Mm-hmm. So I had money to put towards those classes that I really wanted to take.
Right. Yeah, sober hobbies is like a real thing. And you have to fill, like you said, you have to fill this with something, and something that gets you outside of yourself. So you're not just feeling sorry that you can't go to boozy brunch.
Exactly. And then it's like, and that is more of the intrinsic courage that I'm talking about. The more writing classes I took, the better I became at Spanish. I felt more confident because I was improving skills, and that will inherently make you feel more confident. And that's going to show up on dates. That's going to show up in the bedroom. That's going to show up at work. That might help you advocate for a raise. That might help you stand up to a dysfunctional family member, like the more you get to know yourself, the more confident you're going to be in who you are, the less BS you're probably going to put up with, and the more likely you will advocate for your own boundaries.
It's such a good point. It's like a cascading effect.
It really is. It's a domino effect. And like, I think the dating yourself, like whether you're single or in a relationship, you have to do that. And I would say that has to be like a daily practice. It's not just like, okay, cool, I figured this out, next. Like you really
Right.
have to nurture your relationship with yourself every day. And that's at least that's what works for me. And a lot of the people that I interviewed, maybe it's not for everyone, but it's not as easy as a shot of tequila. I'm sorry.
Right. But much more worth it. I've said it in a couple articles, the process of getting sober begins when you give up alcohol. Like giving up alcohol is not being sober. That's how you are able to then start the process.
Well, and I think that's a common misconception. It's like, once I quit drinking, everything will be better. Once my partner quits drinking, everything will be better. And it's like, no, like that's actually where the journey begins. And for me and many other people I've interviewed, alcohol is very rarely the problem. It's usually the symptom of a much larger problem. And for me, when I quit drinking and I got in therapy, I realized that I was self-medicating anxiety, depression, PTSD, body dysmorphia, all of the stuff that I didn't have the language for. And it was just easier to drink instead of feel those things. Now I'm on medication. Now I'm in therapy. Now I am properly medicating those issues that I struggle with, as opposed to just drinking and pretending that they're not there.
You could go on forever doing that, but
yeah,
it doesn't work. It catches up with you. We are doing an article in this same issue about making friends as an adult. And I thought that part of your book was also interesting, as well as like how to tell a potential date that you're sober.
It's difficult to make friends. It's hard, especially as an adult. It's really hard. There's a great book that I'd also recommend. It's called You Will Find Your People by Lane Moore. And it's about making friends as an adult. And it's fantastic. I made quite a bit of friends when I was taking classes. I met friends that were also interested in writing, friends that were also studying Spanish, friends that were along on my travel journeys. That was, and whether they drank or not, it didn't matter, because our friendship was based on something. It was based on a shared interest, as opposed to just meeting for drinks.
Right.
And early sobriety can be really difficult because you're discerning your real friends from your drinking buddies. And that I was not prepared for that level of pain. I just want to be very transparent there. I was not prepared for that. And I think the more time, like we've been talking about, the more time that you take care of yourself and nurture your relationship with yourself, you're not going to allow your friends to mistreat you. You're not going to allow your quote friend to convince you to have just one. So that's a really roundabout answer of saying the best way to make friends is to find new hobbies. Join a walking group, join a knitting club, join a book club, like whatever you're interested in. There are people. If the internet has taught us anything, it's that there is a thriving subculture for everything.
Everything. That's true.
Like I spent a lot of time volunteering in early recovery, like for recovery nonprofits, and working with at-risk LGBT youth. Find organizations that align with your values and volunteer, and it's going to be incredibly rewarding. You're going to meet other like-minded people, and you're just going to feel better because you're giving back. Like it's just it like I can't recommend that enough.
That's like the fastest way to feel better, is to give back, to do things for other people.
I mean, and that can look, volunteering can look anything like, I would, this organization called New Alternatives, they help homeless LGBT youth. And every Sunday they have a Sunday dinner and I would, I'd volunteer, I would help cook dinners, and then people would come and I would serve them food, and that was it, and I've also done volunteer work where I've connected with someone online and helped them write a resume, there's,
right. Yeah.
There's so many different ways you can give back.
I love how this covers so many different things. It's all important. It's all so good.
It's all connected. I mean, yes, the book is about sober sex and dating, but it's about relationships. Right. And as humans, we have all different types of interpersonal relationships.
Can you talk about communication and talking about what you need on a sexual level in relationships?
I mean, alcohol is the great disinhibitor, of course, but that also means that it's hindering our communication. And by that, I mean, you're not able to, if you don't know how you really feel about something, you are unable to communicate that. And then your partner is unable to understand that. And this all sounds quite simple, but I did not have a healthy line of communication in any relationship until I quit drinking. And there's going to be, there's a chapter about how to fight, how to have healthy fights and disagreements in relationships. And the old me would have thought fighting was bad. Why would there be a chapter about fighting? You shouldn't fight. If everything should be great. And no, like a healthy relationship will have disagreements. And if it's kind of like you're talking about not wanting to advocate for where you want to eat dinner. If there's no disagreement, I'm not talking about screaming matches. I'm talking about constructive, productive disagreements. If your relationship doesn't have that, someone's usually withholding. Someone is usually people pleasing, or some version of that. So for me, at least, the more time that I spent getting to know myself and still spend getting to know myself, the better I'm able to communicate in my relationship with my partner, the more I'm able to advocate for what I want in the bedroom, the easier it is for me to tell Nick where I actually want to eat dinner, and it's difficult to communicate when you're drunk. I mean, on a very basic level, there's slurring. You're not going to remember what you're talking about. It can get muddy. People aren't going to remember, or you're going to, maybe you say something you regret, or there's just so many things that can go wrong with drunk fighting.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about sex itself. First of all, I didn't know this word, Anhedonia.
Yeah.
I remember experiencing that, but I didn't know the word. So can you talk about that?
Anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure. Mm-hmm. And there's so many people that could speak to this better than I can. But from my research and personal experience, excessive alcohol use can contribute to a lot of sexual dysfunction. And that means erectile dysfunction. It can mean inability to get wet. It can mean inability to advocate for what you want in the bedroom. And it could also mean inability to feel pleasure. Mm-hmm. And by all of that, I mean, we cannot selectively numb emotions. And if we're drinking to curb those first date jitters, if we're drinking to try something new in the bed, while the alcohol might be numbing that anxiety, it's also numbing your body. So you're not feeling maximum pleasure. You're actually doing yourself a disservice sexually if you are only having drunk or buzzed sex, because you are numbing your body. it is alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. And that means that it is numbing your body, which means you are not feeling maximum pleasure. And I'm repeating myself because I had to drill that into my own head. I could not wrap my head around that because I was under the assumption, oh, drunk sex is better because you're less inhibited and it's more fun and you get freakier. And it is not, it's a fallacy. It really is a fallacy.
Yeah. I remember. So first of all, I love that Brene Brown quote about not being able to selectively numb. Yeah.
Talk about trailblazer, man. She's the shame and vulnerability researcher, right? I mean, that's a lot of what sobriety and recovery is. It's getting in touch with your vulnerability. It's no longer self-medicating shame. It's so much, sobriety is so much more than not drinking.
It's true. There's a section about sort of discovering yourself and who you really are sexually. Like, so how does one go about starting that process? What would you recommend?
I mean, I recommend masturbation to everybody. Everyone should definitely spend time with their own body. And I also want to acknowledge, as you know, I reference asexuality in the book several times. So I want to hold space for that here. Some people just are not interested in masturbation or sex, and that's totally fine. I'm going to go on a slight tangent here and then I'll answer your question. This book is really about sexual liberation from alcohol. And I used to think sexual liberation meant the more, off the cuff, like orgies and free the nipple. And I thought it meant this really big stuff.
Right.
My research, yeah, exactly. But my research has shown me that, I've interviewed several asexual people, and it showed me that sexual liberation can mean anything from realizing you don't like sex without that you used alcohol to quote like sex, and then you get sober and you realize I actually don't like this. This is not, I actually do not enjoy having sex. That is sexual liberation just as much as trying something new in the bedroom or going to a sex party or anything like that. So I just wanted to state that. And it can also, again, all of this is a spectrum. Sexual liberation can also mean realizing maybe you don't like penetrative sex. Maybe you don't like oral sex. Maybe you don't like, we have these ideas of what sex should be. And we've all been ingrained with growing up reading those articles that are like 3 ways to please your man. And, maybe
I read a lot of Cosmo in my day.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, if you don't have sex with your husband 3 times a week, then he's going to leave you. And it's like, there's all this pressure of wow, I really have to do a lot here. And so for me, a big part of my recovery was unpacking all of that, unlearning all of that, and then redefining what I want sex to be for me and in my relationship, which is a very long answer to masturbation is the answer to your question, but figuring out what you want sex to be. How do you define sex? How do you and your partner define sex? How does your partner define sex? And as long as everyone involved is happy and satisfied, that's what matters,
Right. So the liberation, I think you're right. We all sort of assumed that meant being more sexual, but the liberation is really from the expectations.
Exactly. It's the liberation from these sexual explorations, especially for women and non-binary folks who were not taught. We were not taught that. I mean, if you were lucky enough to receive sex ed, it is all very phallocentric about, what to do, how to avoid semen, how to not get pregnant. That's it. But there's no talk of clitoral stimulation or female pleasure at all. And I'm glad that's shifting. Right.
Even hearing you say it, it's so cringy. We weren't taught any of that.
No, it was if you were lucky enough to receive actual sex education, not abstinence based, it's how to use a condom to avoid pregnancy. That's it.
Right.
But there's no mention of anything else. And it's also such a heteronormative approach. Like there's so many other sex acts that are not talked about.
Right. Let's talk more actually about the queer community. Like, what are some specific challenges? I mean, I think getting in touch with who you are sexually has a bigger meaning among the queer community, probably.
Yeah. A lot of people that I interviewed, once they got sober, they were able to embrace their trans identity. They were able to embrace their queer identity, whether they, just embracing their queerness. And there's so many letters on our beautiful rainbow. I'm the proud B of the LGBT. But there's definitely something to say for the disservice that the gay bar does to the queer community. And that it's alcohol and drugs are just so pervasive in the queer community. We are twice as likely to develop substance use disorder, because of many reasons that all are under the stigmatization umbrella.
Right.
But the reason that we flock to the gay bar, it's this rite of passage. You turn 18 or you get a fake ID, but you turn 18 and you go to the gay bar. And that's where you find your people. That's where you meet people that are like you. And if you come from a home that where you are not able to fully be yourself, if you can't be out and proud around your friends and family, there is this safety that you find in the gay bar. And when that safety is found among a sea of drugs and alcohol, you can see how damaging that can be. And, it's also worth noting that, the prefrontal cortex of our brain does not fully develop until we're 25. So we're using these substances when our brains aren't fully developed. And the prefrontal cortex, that's how we make decisions. That's how we advocate for ourselves. That's how we form our personality. So if we are self-medicating at such a young age, we're really hindering our brain development at this point. And that's for everyone. That's not just queer people. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a lot of sober queer resources popping up now. And also just people are interested in drinking less in general right now. There's, dry dating. People might still drink alcohol, but they want sober dating. They don't want alcohol on their dates. I'm really glad that we're living in that time.
For sure. Yeah. And people are much more open-minded.
Yeah. It's refreshing. Honestly, I find it refreshing, and there's a lot more visibility now than there used to be. Now there with social media, we're able to see queerness. We're able to see all different types of queerness with pride. And so you don't necessarily have to go to the gay bar to find that community anymore. As we said, online, every culture is represented online.
Yeah.
And there's peer support groups for queer people, queer and sober. Like Gay and Sober is a nonprofit that's fantastic. There's so many resources popping up, and I'm just glad that people are acknowledging these nuances of, maybe queer and sober moms, sober writers, sober, there's all these intersections that need to be acknowledged. Sober Black Girls Club, acknowledging the intersection of systemic racism and how that contributes to substance use disorder. We were never talking about any of this before.
No, never. Right. That's an area of concern to me, and that I'm glad people are addressing, is how marginalized communities have higher rates of alcoholism, higher rates of substance use disorder. And the correlation I always assume is that it's like when you can't express who you are, or when you're marginalized, when you're not welcome, then you are going to be driven to find ways to fit in. And a lot of times that involves alcohol.
Absolutely. And it's difficult because, when you go to a peer support group that's not inclusive, that can be, it can be very damaging. And just like, for an example, what I mean by that is like, if I were to go to just a regular peer support group and I were to talk about the struggles of being a bisexual woman in recovery, I wouldn't really be held there. You know, like I need to be around other queer people who understand that very particular intersection of queerness and substance use disorder. And it's, for me, that visibility, it has been tremendous for my recovery. And I know there's other people that, you know, that's why Katie started Sober Black Girls Club, because she couldn't go to meetings and talk about that intersection of racism and substance use disorder. So she made a place where she could talk about it. And I think it's fantastic.
That is fantastic. And I will, just to come back to what you said, but I appreciate that you included asexuality in a book about sexuality, because it's really about knowing yourself, not about what kind of sex you're having or how much.
Yeah. God, that was one of my biggest takeaways from this research. Was I interviewed, I think, like 4 or 5 asexual sober people, and the recurring theme was these incredible humans were so vulnerable and sharing with me that they used alcohol to try to make themselves, quote, be normal, try to make themselves like sex. And then they get sober and then they're like, I don't even like this. Why have I been doing this? You know? And while I'm not asexual, I could 100% relate to that impulse to drink in order to feel normal, in order to make myself do something that I thought I should do. And
yes,
I am, if the topic of asexuality is interesting to you, there's a fabulous book called Ace by Angela Chen. And I learned so much about my own sexuality. Just the more I learned about asexuality, the more I learned about the nuances of my own sexuality. And yeah, just throwing that out there, highly recommend it.
Yeah, maybe we can make a list of books, including a list of books that you recommend, because I think these are really important topics. Yeah. It is amazing how many things you said. Something like, I don't even like this, why am I doing it? There were so many things like that after giving up alcohol that fell into that category. Like, why am I doing this?
Totally. I mean, it could be something as big as like having a sexual revelation, you know, but it could also be like, why do I eat this food? I don't even like it. Why do I go to happy hour every Friday? What am I even doing here? You know, like it really is this, when you give up alcohol, when you find freedom outside of that, you really meet like the real version of yourself. And it's a humbling experience. And it's also it's powerful. Like I'm just so glad that I woke up and I decided to like really get to know myself.
Yes. It was unexpected for me. I was like, all right, I gave up alcohol, I'm doing well. But then this whole journey was not, I didn't expect it.
No, I thought giving up alcohol meant just living my normal life just without alcohol.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It is, as we are discussing, it is significantly more than that.
Right. So that's a perfect lead in to the last question we always ask, which is our slogan at After Magazine is, the best life begins after giving up alcohol. And how would you characterize your after?
Oh, I love this question. Well, so the reason that I quit drinking was because I wanted to focus on my writing. You know, I was in a pub with some friends talking about how I don't have enough time to write. And I left the pub that night, and on the walk home, I was like, wow, I just spent 4 hours in a pub talking about how I don't have time to write. Maybe there's something there. And it was, there was something there. Spoiler alert. And my writing career has flourished since I quit drinking. And that is 100% my after. You know, I thought I lived by the, you know, the old Hemingway adage, write drunk, edit sober. I thought I was like so prolific when I was wasted and writing.
I mean,
and
if it's good enough for Hemingway.
yeah. And clearly I was wrong. Actually being present makes me a better writer. And yeah, so my after is 100%. I got out of my own way and I was very focused on my writing and I wrote a book.
Amazing. And it's a great book. I highly recommend. I'm going to hold it up again so we can see. Dry Humping by Tawny Lara. When does it come out?
September 19th.
September 19th. Okay. So this video will be coming out right around then. So it's perfect timing.
Amazing. Yeah. And there's an audio book too. If some people do not, I know some people don't read and they want the audio. Audiobooks count as reading. Some people don't want to read a physical book. Audio is a great option. And I also I have a weekly advice column about sober sex and dating called Beyond Liquid Courage, where people submit questions. So if you're listening and you have a question, I'd love for you to submit it and I can answer it.
Where can they find that?
Go to my Instagram, just the link in bio. There's a submit questions here.
Okay, we'll put some links in the YouTube and on our website and all of that. Wonderful. It was so good to talk to you. It was so great. I'm so excited to be doing this article and interview with you. And I can't wait for your tour. Hear more.
I'm honored. I'm so honored to be on the cover of a magazine. Oh my God. This is like in a magazine that is just so like, you know, so aligned with my mission and so aligned with my work. And it's an honor. Thank you.
We are honored to have you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.